In 1953, Will Durant published the fifth of 11 volumes on the story of civilization, the Renaissance. The story began with Our Oriental Heritage, traveling through ancient Egypt, the Near and Middle East, India, China, and Japan. Next came The Life of Greece, sensational characters of Greek history and the dramatic events in the Near East until the Roman conquest in 146 BC. The journey continued with Caesar and Christ, witnessing Rome's ascent, its fall, and the beginnings of Christianity up to 325 AD. Then came the Age of Faith, sailing through the Byzantine Empire, Islam, Judaism, and Latin Christendom till the end of the 13th century. Now, with the Renaissance, we turn to Italy, where our story begins in 1304, the birth year of Petrarch, and unfolds until 1576. Will Durant writes, "By Renaissance, I refer specifically to Italy. While other parts of Europe, France, Spain, England, the Low Countries, experienced transformations, these were gradual evolutions rather than a sudden rebirth of classical ideals. Even in Italy, I feel that the term Renaissance overemphasizes a revival of classical literature. The true story, as I see it, is one of Italy's economic and cultural awakening in entirely new and distinctive ways. Each volume and chapter in this series can be listened to independently. You can sit back and watch the story unfold, or skip to the sections that resonate most with the events around you. The following is a comprehensive summary of the story of civilization, the Renaissance, highlighting its finest moments. Chapter 1. The Age of Petrarch and Boccaccio. Francesco Petrarca, or Petrarch, and Giovanni Boccaccio, two major figures of the Italian Renaissance. Petrarch was born in Arezzo in 1304 to a Florentine lawyer exiled for political reasons. In 1327, Petrarch met Laura in Avignon, a woman who would become the subject of his most famous poems. Petrarch is considered the father of the Renaissance for his role in reviving interest in classical antiquity and promoting humanism, a system of thought attaching prime importance to human rather than divine. He actively sought and collected classical manuscripts, believing them to be more valuable than anything offered by the Arabs or the Chinese. His writings critiqued the corruption of the Avignon papacy and expressed a yearning for a return to the values and grandeur of the Roman Republic. He wrote extensively in Latin, aiming for a wider European audience. Boccaccio. Giovanni Boccaccio was born in Paris in 1313, the illegitimate son of a Florentine merchant. He grew up in Florence and Naples, where he developed a passion for literature and a taste for romance. In Naples, Boccaccio fell in love with Maria d'Aquino, a noblewoman he nicknamed Fiammetta, Little Flame. Their passionate affair inspired some of his most notable works, including Filostrato and Tesside, the Decameron. Boccaccio's masterpiece, the Decameron, was written shortly after the Black Death of 1348. It consists of 100 stories told by 10 young Florentines who flee the plague-ridden city to a secluded villa. The tales, drawn from various sources, offer a vibrant and often humorous portrayal of Italian society, exploring themes of love, wit, and human folly. The Decameron is noted for its masterful construction, elegant prose, and its celebration of life amidst a backdrop of death and despair. The Black Death. The Black Death took two forms: pulmonary, with high fever and spitting of blood, bringing death in 3 days, or bubonic, with fever, abscesses, and carbuncles, leading to death in 5 days. Half the population of Italy was carried off in the successive outbreak of the plague from 1348 to 1365. Neither relatives nor friends, nor priests nor friars accompanied the corpses to the grave. In many places of the city trenches were dug, very broad and deep, and into these the bodies were thrown and covered with a little earth. And thus layer after layer until the trench was full, and then another trench was begun. And I, Agnolo di Tura, with my own hands buried 5 of my children in a single trench, and many others did the like. And many dead were so ill covered that the dogs dug them up and ate them, dispersing their limbs throughout the city. And no bells rang, and nobody wept no matter what his loss, because almost everyone expected death. And people believed, This is the end of the world. In Florence, according to Matteo Villani, 3 out of 5 of the population died between April and September of 1348. Political turmoil in Italy. Both Petrarch and Boccaccio lived during a period of intense political upheaval in Italy. The country was divided into numerous city-states, constantly vying for power and often embroiled in conflict. This fragmentation, while hindering national unity, fostered a spirit of competition and cultural patronage that contributed to the vibrancy of the Renaissance. The Italian city-states. Florence was a center of artistic and cultural innovation, but also plagued by factionalism and violence. Its wealth derived from its thriving woolen industry and banking. Siena rivaled Florence in artistic achievements but experienced economic decline after a series of violent uprisings. Milan, under the Visconti family, emerged as a powerful region, expanding its territories through conquest and diplomacy. Venice, known for its maritime prowess and stable government, was a major trading power, controlling a vast commercial network throughout the Mediterranean and beyond. Genoa, another maritime republic, was Venice's main rival in trade and naval power. The two cities fought a series of bitter wars for control of Mediterranean trade routes. Petrarch and Boccaccio's later years and legacy. In their later years, both Petrarch and Boccaccio turned towards a more introspective and scholarly approach. Boccaccio, influenced by Petrarch, became a pioneer in Greek humanism, collecting manuscripts and writing treatises on Greek mythology and history. Chapter 2. The Popes in Avignon. In 1309, Pope Clement V, a Frenchman heavily influenced by King Philip IV of France, moved the papacy from Rome and Italy to Avignon in southern France. This relocation, termed the Babylonian captivity, was prompted by several factors. Clement V's safety. King Philip had previously humiliated and nearly killed Pope Boniface VIII by making him starve. The French cardinals dominated as they constituted a majority in the Sacred College and preferred to stay in France. The papacy's efforts to establish a European world state under its control had failed, and Italian cities and regions were increasingly asserting their independence. The papacy had grown vulnerable in Rome, hence it was shifted to Avignon in France. Avignon Papacy, Administration and Finances. The Avignon Papacy developed a complex bureaucratic system. This system involved various sources of revenue, including 1/3 of a new bishop or abbot's annual income paid to the curia, full annual revenue of the religious endowment paid to a new pope, followed by 1/10 annually. Personal possessions of deceased cardinals, bishops, and abbots reverted to the papacy. Numerous fees were levied for papal judgments. This aggressive revenue collection led to accusations of greed and corruption. Despite this, the papacy faced deficits due to wars and loans to France. Luxury and scandal in Avignon. The Avignon court became known for its lavish lifestyle, particularly under Clement VI, who generously patronized artists, poets, and maintained a large entourage. This extravagance further fueled accusations of worldliness and corruption. Petrarch, the renowned Italian poet, condemned Avignon as a den of vice and immorality, filled with fornication, incest, rape, and adultery. St. Catherine of Siena said, "The court's nostrils were assailed by the odors of hell." Consequences of the Babylonian captivity. The Babylonian captivity and the subsequent Great Schism, a split within the Catholic Church with rival popes in Rome and Avignon, weakened the Church's authority and prestige. European nations like England and Germany increasingly resisted papal interference and taxes. And the clergy's perceived worldliness and corruption led to a decline in public respect. These factors ultimately led to the Protestant Reformation. The road to Rome. Several popes worked towards restoring the papacy to Rome. Urban V returned the papacy to Rome in 1367, but faced challenges and eventually returned to Avignon, where he died in 1370. Gregory IX, facing a revolt in the Papal States instigated by Florentine resistance to papal legates, ultimately returned the papacy to Rome in 1377, where he died in 1378. His death triggered the Great Schism, further dividing the Church. The Dulcino affair. The brutal persecution of Dulcino of Novara and his followers. The Apostolic Brethren of Parma preached against papal authority and advocated for poverty and a return to the early Church. The brethren were accused of heresy and, after refusing to appear before the Inquisition, were attacked and besieged in the Piedmontese Alps. Many were killed in battle or burned at the stake, including Dolcino's sister, Margherita, who refused to recant her beliefs even when offered a chance to escape death by marriage. Dolcino and his associate Longino were mounted on a cart and were paraded through Vercelli. During this procession, their flesh was cut from them bit by bit with hot pincers. Their limbs and genitals were wrenched from their bodies. Finally, they were allowed to die. Chapter 3. The Rise of the Medici. The Italian Renaissance, a revival of spirit after 1,000 years of darkness. The Gothic style, with its arches and somber statues, faded away as Italy re-embraced the elegance of Roman columns and the music of Virgil's verse. But this rebirth was fueled by more than a simple love for the past. It was wealth, earned through bold trade and keen business sense, that became the true engine of the Renaissance, funneling funds into the hands of artists like Michelangelo and Titian. The cradle of Renaissance, Florence. Florence was a city of extraordinary promise. Northern Italy, especially Florence, retained much from the Roman era, from city structures to surviving laws. Positioned on the Mediterranean, it became a hub of trade, bringing goods, ideas, and culture from all corners of the known world. Florence's thriving industry and commerce made it one of Christendom's wealthiest cities. Yet, unlike Venice, whose wealth often funded pleasures, the Florentines developed an intellectual curiosity that helped elevate their city into a cultural beacon. A significant catalyst came in 1439 when Cosimo de' Medici, backed by immense wealth, hosted the Council of Florence. The arrival of Greek scholars with ancient manuscripts lit a fire for classical learning, transforming Florence into the Athens of Italy. The material wealth of Florence. Florence's wealth laid the foundation for its blossoming. Its textile industry employed a quarter of its population, driven by advanced capitalistic methods and a centralized production system. Florentine merchants traded across the Mediterranean and beyond, even as far as China, underpinned by a powerful banking sector led by the Bardi and Medici banks. Cosimo Pater Patrii. Cosimo de' Medici, inheriting both his family name and a vast fortune of more than 170,000 florins, used his financial resources to expand his empire through banking, trade, and even diplomacy with the Ottoman Sultan. Though he held no formal title, Cosimo wielded great power in Florence, ruling with quiet strength. "States are not ruled with dumb followers," he remarked when accused of favoritism. Cosimo's wealth allowed him to patronize artists like Brunelleschi and Donatello. He collected classical texts, creating libraries open to the public. His leadership brought a rare peace to Italy, and his generosity earned him the affectionate title, Pater Patrii, Father of the Fatherland. The rise of the humanists. During Cosimo's time, a new class of intellectuals emerged, the humanists. Devoted to learning, they called their studies Studia Humanitatis, the humanities. Poggio Bracciolini, one of the most ardent humanists, salvaged forgotten texts by authors like Lucretius and Quintilian, believing he was rescuing knowledge from barbarians. As Greek scholars brought fresh insights to Florence, the city became a center for translating and analyzing Greek and Roman texts. Cosimo even established a Platonic academy where the humanists ushered in the concept of the well-rounded individual. Brunelleschi and the revival of architecture. Florence's architectural landscape transformed under the genius of Filippo Brunelleschi, moving away from the wretched Gothic architecture. His best work was the majestic dome of the Florence Cathedral, inspired by the Pantheon in Rome. Brunelleschi also designed the Church of San Lorenzo and the Pazzi Chapel, setting a new standard for elegance. The revival of sculpture. Florentine sculpture also flourished under Medici patronage. Lorenzo Ghiberti's bronze doors for the baptistry, with scenes in relief, were so exquisite that Michelangelo deemed them worthy to grace the gates of paradise. Donatello created the bronze David, one of the first freestanding nude statues. His sculptures, from the majestic Gattamelata in Padua to the lifelike St. George, redefined the art of sculpture in Italy. Painting in the age of perspective. Paolo Uccello explored perspective, and Masaccio mastered it, creating the frescoes that deeply influenced future masters like Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. Masaccio's innovative techniques in works like the Trinity fresco in Santa Maria Novella brought a realism that transformed Florentine painting. In contrast, Francis Angelico, a Dominican friar, depicted religious scenes with spiritual beauty, adorning San Marco's walls with frescoes. Florence, a city of craftsmen and artists. Florence was alive with artistic energy. Artisans, from potters to goldsmiths, poured their skills into creating beauty for their city. The Medici's patronage, especially Cosimo's, offered stability, allowing art and learning to thrive. Even after his death in 1464, the spirit of renewal and brilliance he fostered continued to shape Florence and beyond. Chapter 4: The Golden Age. The Golden Age of Florence was an era of achievement under Medici rule. Piero il Gattiso, a troubled legacy. Cosimo's son, Piero il Gattiso, burdened by gout, inherited his father's wealth but faced a politically volatile city. Lacking Cosimo's acumen, his decision to call in debts led to a brief revolt in the name of liberty, but Medici loyalists quickly restored order, paving the way for Piero's son, Lorenzo. The rise of Lorenzo, a leader in the making. Lorenzo, groomed by his grandfather for leadership, showed promise early. Backed by the Medici network, Lorenzo became Florence's de facto leader at the age of 20. Lorenzo the Magnificent. Lorenzo, a man of deep contradictions, guided Florence through political crises with pragmatism. He diverted famine by securing grain imports while earning the moniker Magnifico for his opulent lifestyle. The passing of Lorenzo. Lorenzo's death at 43 brought an end to Florence's golden age. His legacy as statesman, poet, and patron echoed throughout Italy. His passing foreshadowed the political and social upheavals that would soon envelop Florence and alter the course of Italian history. Chapter 5: Savonarola and the Republic. A world of fervent faith and fiery rhetoric, led by none other than Girolamo Savonarola, the Dominican friar whose influence swept through Florence. Savonarola was a man transformed, a prophet who emerged from deep personal introspection with a message that gripped the hearts and minds of Florentines. His sermons echoed through the city with denunciations of immorality, prophecies of doom, and calls to repentance, pulling at the people's conscience and urging them towards spiritual renewal. Even Lorenzo de' Medici, the great patron of the arts, was persuaded to bring Savonarola to Florence. But Lorenzo would soon regret this, finding himself challenged by this indomitable man of God. When Lorenzo passed and his son Piero was expelled, Savonarola, now a political figure as well, helped shape the new Florentine Republic. As a friar statesman, he convinced the ruling council to establish a new government modeled on Venice's constitution, creating a council of 3,000 citizens, the Great Council, to govern Florence. Savonarola did more than preach. He made reforms, from creating a state loan office to rescuing the poor from high-interest lenders, striving to forge a society guided by both moral and economic justice. Yet, his boldness would be his undoing. When he denounced the corrupt practices of Pope Alexander VI, Savonarola refused to be silenced, despite orders from the Pope himself to cease preaching. Savonarola insisted that the superior may not give any command contrary to the rules of my order. The Pope may not give any command opposed to charity or the gospel. Savonarola and two of his supporting friars were imprisoned for their continued resistance to corruption. On May 23, 1498, church and civil authorities condemned, hanged, and burned the bodies of the three friars in the main square of Florence. After his death, Florence continued to struggle, until the Medici, with support from the Holy League, reclaimed Florence in 1512. Their return would end Florence's democratic experiment and begin a rule that, by 1531 under Alessandro de' Medici, plunged the city into brutality. But the Renaissance fire refused to die. Florentine artists, now scattered across Italy, brought the city's legacy with them, ensuring that its artistic genius would ignite new imaginations for centuries to come. Chapter 6: Milan. Beyond the Big Three, Milan and its neighbors. We broaden our view beyond Florence, Venice, and Rome, to uncover the Renaissance's pulse in cities across the Italian peninsula. The Renaissance was a mosaic of experiences, where silk mills, grand courts, and spirited middle classes worked and lived side by side. Take Bologna, whose massive silk mill alone employed the work of 4,000 spinning women, bridging traditional handicrafts and modern industry. In the northwest, the Principality of Savoy-Piedmont, ruled by one of Europe's oldest dynasties, hovered at the Renaissance's edge, never fully succumbing to its magnetic cultural pull. With the rise of the Sforza family in 1450, Milan saw a rebirth, led by Francesco Sforza, a military leader who brought stability. Under Lodovico il Moro, Milan reached its zenith of cultural influence, drawing scholars and artists like Leonardo da Vinci to a court with intellectual energy. Milan's influence rippled outward to Como, Moreto, and Venice. In each city, the Renaissance unfolded uniquely, blending cultural pride, artistic ambition, and a yearning for glory that defined Italy's legacy to the world. Chapter 7, Leonardo da Vinci. Beginnings in Florence, 1452 to 1483. In 1452, Leonardo da Vinci was born near the Tuscan town of Vinci. From early on he stood out, an artist and thinker in the making, with a gift for music, mathematics, and drawing. Recognizing his talent, his father apprenticed him to Andrea del Verrocchio in Florence, where Leonardo honed his skills. It was here, they say, that Leonardo painted the angel in The Baptism of Christ, so masterfully that Verrocchio abandoned painting. In works like The Annunciation, we see Leonardo's emerging style, a balance of grace and structure. He joined the company of St. Luke, an artist's guild that allowed him to study anatomy, laying the foundation for his precise and expressive work on figures. In 1476, an accusation of homosexuality marred his life. He was imprisoned briefly, then released. It's said he never fully forgave Florence for this scandal, leaving a deep sense of betrayal that might explain his eventual departure. The Milan years, 1482 to 1499. Seeking new horizons, Leonardo moved to Milan in 1482, offering his services to Lodovico Sforza in a letter of astonishing range. He claimed expertise in architecture, engineering, sculpture, and painting, pitching ideas for bridges, siege machines, and even underwater vessels. Initially tasked with decorating the court and creating portraits, Leonardo took to these smaller projects with a characteristic grace and intensity. The Virgin of the Rocks, a masterwork commissioned during this period, showcases his trademark composition, a tranquil Madonna, an angel, and landscapes that appear otherworldly. Return to Florence. In 1500, Leonardo returned to Florence, now a mature artist in a city transformed by political and cultural shifts. His style, more contemplative, was out of step with Florence's more austere republic. In 1502, Leonardo took on an entirely different role, military engineer to Cesare Borgia, joining his campaign with designs for weapons and maps. Returning to Florence, Leonardo began The Battle of the Standard, an ambitious mural for the Hall of the 500, entering into rivalry with the young Michelangelo. The competition between the two was intense, yet Leonardo's experimental techniques backfired, ruining his mural, which he ultimately abandoned. Yet, during this period, he painted the Mona Lisa, a portrait whose famed smile and enigmatic gaze would captivate audiences for centuries. Refusing to sell it, he brought it with him wherever he went, as if it held some deep personal meaning. Leonardo the man. Who was Leonardo beyond his works? Contemporaries describe him as a man of striking beauty in his youth, though he aged quickly, contrasting with the enduring vitality of his rival Michelangelo. Leonardo's private life remains mysterious. Although he never married, his deep friendships and open-minded approach reveal much about his character. He was kind-hearted, purchasing caged birds to release them and expressing a profound empathy for animals. This compassion, however, contrasts with his willingness to design war machines. A solitary figure, Leonardo cherished independence and quiet focus, often lost in his thoughts and scientific studies. His notebooks, filled with observations on light, water, and anatomy, display the sharp eye of a scientist and the deep soul of an artist. Yet, his pursuit of perfection often led him to leave projects unfinished, a habit that has puzzled admirers ever since. The inventor. In Leonardo's world, art and science were inseparable. At the Sforza court, he designed mechanical wonders for pageants, sketching machines that wouldn't become practical until centuries later. His notebooks overflow with ideas, from screw-cutting machines to flying devices, tank-like vehicles, and even a prototype for a parachute. Driven by a fascination with flight, Leonardo's sketches of birds and winged machines reveal his dream of soaring through the skies. The scientist. Leonardo's art led him to science, inspiring him to study everything from human anatomy to astronomy. Through meticulous dissections, he created anatomical drawings unmatched in detail, illustrating the complexities of human muscles, the circulatory system, and even the workings of the heart. His understanding of physics was equally advanced, delving into the laws of motion, force, and gravity. While some of his scientific theories fell flat, his dedication to empirical observation placed him ahead of his time. Leonardo's genius extended to his followers, inspiring a circle of Milanese artists who carried forward his style. Chapter 8: Tuscany and Umbria. Tuscany and Umbria, regions whose beauty and spirit drew artists to shape masterpieces. Luca Signorelli. Signorelli was captivated by the human body and explored its power in works like The School of Pan, a canvas alive with nude figures in vivid poses. His masterpiece, however, lies in the frescoes of the San Brizio Chapel in Orvieto Cathedral, where scenes of the Antichrist and the Last Judgment pulse with a visceral, almost frenzied energy. Here, Signorelli unleashes an orgy of human flesh, prefiguring the intensity Michelangelo would later bring to the Sistine Chapel. Siena and Sodoma. Siena, a city torn by political strife yet alive with creative fervor, nurtured its own unique artistic voice. Among its artists was Giovanni Antonio Bozzi, better known as Sodoma, whose life and art were equally colorful. Sodoma himself lived with wild and disgusting eccentricity, surrounding himself with animals and engaging in bestial pursuits. Umbria and the Baglioni dynasty. The rugged landscapes of Umbria shaped a school of art imbued with religious fervor, especially in cities like Perugia and Assisi. Perugia, controlled by the infamous Baglioni family, was a place of violent passion, where art thrived amidst political chaos. The Baglioni, handsome, ambitious, and notorious for their pagan lifestyles, held Perugia in a grip of lawlessness, as described by the historian Matarazzo. Every man administered right unto himself, by his own authority and with royal hand. Pietro Perugino. Out of this turbulent environment arose Pietro Perugino, who, though trained in Florence, retained a soft, devotional touch that defined the Umbrian style. But perhaps his greatest contribution to art was training a student who would eclipse even him, Raphael, whose brilliance would carry the Umbrian school to new heights. Chapter 9: Mantua. Mantua, under the stable rule of the Gonzaga dynasty, became a haven for education and art, centered around three influential figures: Vittorino da Feltre, Andrea Mantegna, and Isabella d'Este. Vittorino da Feltre. Vittorino, an educator of remarkable vision, believed in nurturing the mind and body alike in his school of princes, drawing students from noble families across Italy. So devoted was he to his students that he left little for himself, dying with barely enough to cover his burial. Andrea Mantegna. In Mantegna, we find a master of perspective in classical antiquity, who created works that feel rooted in the ancient world while alive with Renaissance vibrancy. His greatest achievement, The Triumph of Caesar, is an 88-foot frieze capturing Caesar's victory procession, filled with soldiers, captives, musicians, animals, and trophies, a pageant of human and architectural detail. Even into his later years, Mantegna remained a sought-after artist, creating work for both popes and princes. Isabella d'Este. Isabella d'Este, Marchioness of Mantua, embodied the Renaissance spirit like few others. A diplomat and discerning patron, she surrounded herself with the finest art, manuscripts, and antiques, making her court a center of sophistication. Her ambition as a collector was boundless. She even sought work from Leonardo da Vinci and Giovanni Bellini, though unsuccessfully. Beyond her artistic pursuits, Isabella played a crucial role in maintaining Mantua's independence, navigating her city through Italy's shifting political landscape. Each of these figures, Vittorino, Mantegna, and Isabella, reflects a different facet of the Renaissance in Mantua. They made Mantua a place of intellectual curiosity, leaving a legacy in Italy's artistic heritage. Chapter 10. Ferrara. The House of Este in Ferrara. Italy. Culture, conflict, and a legacy of patronage. The House of Este, rulers of Ferrara, Modena, and Reggio, rose from humble origins to become cultural and political titans in northern Italy. From 1208 to 1598, they governed Ferrara, balancing an alliance with the papacy and the Holy Roman Empire while operating as independent sovereigns. Even as conflicts and power plays threatened their rule, the Este family maintained popular support through shrewd governance and vibrant court life that offered prosperity and pageantry to their people. In 1311, a struggle with Pope Clement V nearly cost the Estensi their rule, as Ferrara was seized by the church. However, Ferrara's citizens, finding religious rule more restrictive than that of the Estensi, rebelled and restored the family by 1317. Though they reconciled with the papacy, the Estensi continued to strengthen their independence through political maneuvers and public works. Art under Este patronage. Rather than grand churches, the Estensi focused on opulent palaces like the Palazzo di Lodovico il Moro and the Palazzo de Diamanti, designed to showcase their wealth and sophistication. Ferrara as an intellectual center. The intellectual life of Ferrara was shaped by the university, founded in 1391. With a faculty of 45 professors by 1474, the University of Ferrara became known for its programs in astronomy, mathematics, and medicine. For the Este family, however, the Renaissance era was filled with shifting alliances and territorial battles that defined their legacy. Alfonso's alliance with Charles V of Spain culminated in his involvement in the sack of Rome, a brutal power struggle underlying Italy's cultural flowering. Despite Alfonso's military successes, Ferrara's golden age waned, marking the end of an era. The city's cultural prominence faded with the passing of the Este dynasty. Chapter 11. Venice and her realm. Padua under Venetian rule. Once a rival to Venice, Padua was conquered and eventually became an educational hub within the Venetian domain. Its university, known throughout Europe, attracted the brightest minds of the Renaissance, like Pico della Mirandola, Ariosto, and Galileo. Sources of Venetian wealth and power. Venice's immense wealth came from its powerful mercantile marine and diverse industries, with its ships dominating trade routes across Europe and beyond. Strategically located, Venice controlled key trade routes, importing raw materials and exporting finished goods to distant markets, including Egypt, Byzantium, and Asia. The city's annual trade volume surpassed that of any other European power, making it the commercial center of the Mediterranean. Venetian imperialism, the drive for expansion. Venice's reliance on trade and imported resources drove its imperialistic ambitions. With a growing need for food, raw materials, and strategic trade routes, Venice engaged in both warfare and diplomacy to expand its influence. This imperial drive was key to Venice's desire for dominance, fueling its policies and shaping its foreign relations. The Venetian-Milanese Wars. The expansionist ambitions of Venice and Milan led to decades of conflict, as the two powers vied for control over critical resources and trade routes. Fears of Milanese control over these vital assets fueled Venetian aggression, and the wars that followed were marked by strategic maneuvering and heavy losses on both sides. Despite the drawn-out struggle, Venice emerged victorious, solidifying its dominance in northeastern Italy and beyond. Venetian expansion in the Adriatic. Venice's geographic location at the northernmost point of the Mediterranean made control of the Adriatic Sea essential to its strategic security. In its drive to eliminate piracy and secure trade routes, Venice launched a series of campaigns to dominate the Dalmatian coast and its islands, expanding its reach throughout the Adriatic. Exploiting the weakening Byzantine Empire, Venice's expansion led it to become the uncontested Queen of the Adriatic. Caterina Cornaro and Venetian Cyprus. Amid the rising threat of the Ottoman Turks, Caterina Cornaro, the last queen of Cyprus from the Lusignan dynasty, abdicated her throne in favor of Venetian rule. Her abdication marked the end of Cypriot independence and the beginning of Venetian control, with the island becoming an outpost in the Venetian Empire. Caterina received a pension of 8,000 ducats and retired to Asilo, near Treviso, where she became a patron of the arts, continuing to influence the cultural landscape from afar. Venice and the Ottoman Turks. Venice initially maintained peaceful relations with the Ottoman Turks, focusing on trade rather than religious conflict, even after the fall of Constantinople. However, as the Ottomans increasingly controlled Black Sea trade routes, tensions grew. Despite participating in a crusade against the Ottomans, Venice prioritized its commercial interests and ultimately made peace, ceding key territories to the Turks rather than risk further conflict. The Venetian focus on commerce over religious unity reshaped its approach to politics. Venetian military and governance. Venice's military structure was a model of efficiency, contributing to its reputation as a formidable power in Italy. Unlike other Italian states that relied on mercenaries, Venice maintained a well-trained militia drawn from its own citizens and supported by a navy of warships and merchant vessels. Its government was an oligarchy dominated by elite families who restricted political power to their descendants, forming an exclusive but effective ruling system. The Council of Ten and Venetian security. To protect Venice from internal conspiracies, the Council of Ten was established as a secretive body responsible for state security. This council, though feared for its perceived harshness, adhered to strict legal procedures, requiring extensive votes to approve significant decisions, ensuring that even its authority was checked by formal processes. Employing spies and enforcing swift justice, the Council of Ten kept Venice stable amidst the challenges of political intrigue. The Doge's role in Venetian government. The Doge, Venice's elected leader, was a figure of ceremonial prestige but limited actual power. Serving as the state's symbolic head, the Doge was subordinate to the council and senate, fulfilling his role as a dignified representative rather than a ruler with independent authority. Doge Francesco Foscari and his downfall. During his 34-year reign, Doge Francesco Foscari expanded Venice's territory to its peak, though his policies angered rival states, leading to the formation of the League of Cambrai against Venice. In 1450, one of the inquisitors of the Ten was assassinated. Foscari's son was credited with the crime, tortured nearly to death and then exiled. This led to Foscari's deposition, ending his reign amid sorrow and scandal. Life in Venice, prosperity, trade, and celebration. In the 15th and 16th centuries, Venice was a city of vibrant life and prosperity, a magnet for traders, visitors, and artists from around the world. Wealth from international trade fueled the city's opulent lifestyle, with festivals, spectacles, and a flourishing art scene, making Venice a true Renaissance capital. Venetian festivals and theater. Venice's legendary festivals celebrated state occasions, religious holidays, and the arrival of dignitaries. However, both church and state imposed some restrictions, wary of the immoral sexual behavior that often accompanied these performances. Venetian relationship with the church. Despite outward displays of piety, Venice's relationship with the church was often tense. The Venetian government tightly controlled bishops, church finances, and even restricted papal authority, prioritizing state sovereignty over strict adherence to Rome's influence. Architectural splendor in Venice. Venice's architecture was a mix of Byzantine, Gothic, and Renaissance styles. Along its canals, the grand palaces of wealthy Venetian families displayed the city's prosperity. Chapter 12. Emilia and the Marches. Correggio. Antonio Allegri, better known as Correggio, hailed from the small Italian commune of the same name near Reggio. His art brought international renown to his hometown, which is remembered only because of a single celebrated artist. Veronica Gambara, a patron and the wife of Correggio's ruler, introduced his work to Isabella d'Este in a letter in 1528. Correggio's training remains somewhat of a mystery, though he likely studied with Francesco de Bianchi Ferrari. Correggio's career reflects the era's shifting tastes, moving from primarily religious works to a fascination with pagan themes. In 1518, a commission from Abbess Giovanna de Piacenza led him to paint frescoes of Diana, the goddess of the hunt, in the convent of San Paolo in Parma. This exposure to secular themes transformed his approach, culminating in later commissions at the Benedictine Abbey Church of San Giovanni Evangelista, where he painted nude apostles like Michelangelo's figures in the Sistine Chapel. Correggio's achievement came with his decoration of the Parma Cathedral dome, a swirling, sensual Assumption of the Virgin. Critics found the nudity excessive. One church canon called it a fricassee of frogs. Despite his art's exuberance, Correggio led a modest, quiet life. He died in 1534, likely from heat stroke, after a long journey carrying payment for his work. Bologna. Once a city of intellectual might, Bologna continued to thrive under papal rule after Pope Julius II ousted the Bentivogli family in 1506. The city's architecture and arcaded streets allowed citizens to walk for miles under roof cover. The story of Caterina Sforza. Born out of wedlock to the Duke of Milan, Caterina Sforza married the cruel and greedy Girolamo Riario. In 1488, his subjects rebelled, killed him, and took Caterina and her children hostage. But troops loyal to her held the citadel. She promised her captors, if released, to go and convince the citadel to surrender. They agreed, but kept her children as hostages. Once in the castle, she had its gates closed and vigorously managed the resistance of the garrison. When the rebels threatened to kill her children unless she and her men submitted, she defied them and told them that she had another child in her womb and could easily conceive more. Lodovico of Milan sent more troops to help. The rebellion was mercilessly suppressed, and Caterina's son Ottaviano was made Lord of Forlì under his mother's iron thumb. Castiglione. Castiglione, a courtier and diplomat, spent years perfecting the courtier, eventually publishing it in 1528. The book laid out his vision of the ideal noble, highlighting the importance of gentle birth, martial skill, a refined mind, and respect for women. Castiglione's own life mirrored the ideals he championed. Born into nobility, he served at the courts of Mantua, Milan, and Urbino, forming friendships with Guidobaldo and Elisabetta. His marriage to Ippolita Torelli was short-lived, as she died shortly after giving birth. After his death in 1529, Castiglione was buried beside his beloved wife in Mantua, his epitaph expressing a longing to be reunited with her in the afterlife. His legacy lived on through The Courtier, a work that became essential reading for European aristocrats and defined Renaissance courtly ideals. Chapter 13, The Kingdom of Naples. The Kingdom of Naples encompassed a large portion of southern Italy, featuring prominent coastal cities like Pescara, Reggio, Capri, and the city of Naples. Naples was the only major city in the kingdom, with the rest of the country primarily agricultural and under the control of feudal barons. The House of Anjou, which previously ruled Naples, experienced a decline marked by the reigns of Queen Joanna I and II. The reign of Queen Joanna I ended when Charles of Durazzo had her strangled with a silken cord in 1382. Joanna II, though aged 40 at her accession in 1414, was as excitable as the first. She married thrice, banished her second husband, and had the third murdered. Faced by revolt, she called to her aid King Alfonso of Aragon in Sicily and adopted him as her son and heir. Alfonso of Aragon in Sicily, after a series of battles and political maneuvers, seized the throne of Naples, marking the end of Anjou rule and the beginning of the Aragonese dynasty. Alfonso, despite his harsh taxation policies, was considered a good king by the Neapolitans. He was known for his accessibility, walking among the people without guards. Alfonso was a patron of humanist scholars, earning him the nickname Il Magnanimous. He generously supported classical scholars, providing them with financial assistance and access to his court. Alfonso's support of humanists. Alfonso's court was a hub for humanists like Lorenzo Valla, Filfo, and Manetti. He demonstrated a deep appreciation for classical learning, even having classics read to him during meals. Lorenzo Valla was a scholar in Alfonso's court, known for his sharp critiques of medieval Latin. Valla's treatise on pleasure and the true good explored humanist thought, arguing that the pursuit of pleasure and happiness were the ultimate goals of human life. He challenged the authenticity of the donation of Constantine, a document used by the papacy to assert its temporal power. Valla argued that the donation was a forgery and that the papacy's power was illegitimate. Despite his controversial views, Valla eventually reconciled with the papacy and became a papal secretary. Antonio Beccadelli. Beccadelli, another scholar in Alfonso's court, gained notoriety for his controversial work Hermaphroditus, a collection of Latin poems celebrated for its eloquence but criticized for its explicit content. Beccadelli enjoyed a successful academic career and was appointed as court historiographer in Naples. Ferrante's rule. Alfonso's successor, Ferrante, was known for his ruthlessness and cruelty, though these accounts may be biased. He faced papal opposition and baronial revolts, which he suppressed with brutal efficiency. Despite his personal flaws, Ferrante secured his rule and reigned for 36 years. The Neapolitan Academy. Ferrante's prime minister, Giovanni Pontano, was a poet, philosopher, and diplomat. Pontano established the Neapolitan Academy, a gathering of scholars who sought to revive classical Roman culture. Sicily's limited Renaissance. Sicily, in contrast to mainland Italy, remained largely untouched by the Renaissance. Its cultural development was hindered by a powerful feudal system and widespread poverty. Chapter 14. The Crisis in the Church. The Papal Schism. The return of the papacy to Rome under Gregory IX was short-lived due to the intense pressure from Romans. A crowd of Romans gathered outside the Vatican, threatening to kill all non-Italian cardinals unless a Roman were made pope. The cardinals, fearing for their safety, hastily elected Urban VI. His subsequent actions, like his attempts to reform the church and slapping cardinals to discipline them, created resentment and led to accusations of his election being invalid. French cardinals opposing Urban VI elected Clement VII, establishing a rival papacy in Avignon. This division, known as the Papal Schism, had consequences for the church, turning it into a political tool for competing nations. The schism resulted in deep divisions within Christendom, with each side viewing the other as heretical. The legitimacy of sacraments administered by priests aligned with the opposing pope was questioned, leading to widespread confusion and fear. The schism continued with the deaths of Urban VI and Clement VII, with their respective factions each electing new popes. The councils and the popes. The Council of Pisa, convened to end the schism, deposed both Gregory and Benedict and elected Alexander V as the new pope. However, this attempt backfired, resulting in 3 popes instead of 2. Meanwhile, Baldassare Causa had been made papal vicar of Bologna by Boniface IX. He had governed the city like a mercenary, with absolute power. He had taxed everything, including prostitution, gambling, and usury. According to his secretary, he had seduced 200 virgins, matrons, widows, and nuns. But he was a man of precious ability in politics and war. He had accumulated great wealth and commanded a force of troops personally loyal to him. Perhaps he could conquer the Papal States from Gregory and reduce Gregory to submission. Alexander V's successor, John XXIII, a skilled politician and warrior, sought to consolidate power but was compelled by the king of the Romans, Sigismund, to convene another council at Constance. The Council of Constance drew representatives from across Europe and became a pivotal event in church history. John XXIII, fearing exposure of his past, fled but was later deposed by the council. The council issued the decree Sacrosancta, a document asserting the council's authority over the pope, marking a significant shift in power dynamics within the church. Gregory XII, in a strategic move, resigned, allowing the council to legitimize itself and paving the way for the eventual end of the schism. Benedict XIII's continued resistance proved futile as he was eventually deposed. The council then elected Martin V as the sole pope, finally ending the Great Schism after 39 years of division. The triumph of the papacy. Upon assuming the papacy, Martin V faced numerous challenges, including a depleted treasury, political instability within the Papal States, and widespread disregard for papal authority in Europe. Despite these challenges, Martin V proved to be an effective leader. He restored order in Rome, initiated rebuilding efforts, and appointed talented individuals to key positions. His pragmatic approach to church finances, prioritizing financial stability over immediate reform, drew criticism, foreshadowing future conflicts over church practices. Eugenius IV, Martin V's successor, was a devout man but faced opposition from cardinals and powerful families like the Colonna, further highlighting the complex political landscape surrounding the papacy. The Council of Basel, convened by Martin V, renewed its assertion of supremacy over the Pope, deposing Eugenius IV and electing an antipope, reigniting the schism. The emergence of nationalistic movements within the Church, like the Gallican Church in France and similar movements in Germany and Bohemia, threatened to dismantle the Roman Church's structure. Ironically, the threat of the Ottoman Turks and the impending fall of Constantinople offered a lifeline to Eugenius IV. The Byzantine Empire, seeking Western aid, initiated negotiations for the reunion of the Eastern and Western churches. The Council of Ferrara Florence facilitated the reunion, with Eugenius IV playing a central role. However, this reunion was short-lived as it faced resistance within Constantinople and ultimately failed to prevent the city's fall to the Ottomans. Chapter 15. The Renaissance captures Rome. How the Renaissance affected the city of Rome and the papacy. Rome in 1447. At this time, Rome was in a sorry state. It was much smaller than it had been during the Roman Empire. Smaller than other major Italian cities like Venice, Florence, and Milan. The water supply was unreliable, with many inhabitants drinking from the river Tiber. Much of the population lived in unhealthy plains that were prone to flooding and malaria. Famous landmarks like the Capitoline and Palatine Hills were used for goat grazing and quarried for building materials. The economy and society of Rome. The city's economy was primarily based on the church's revenues, with little industry or commerce. The nobility owned most of the land and exploited the peasantry. They also frequently feuded with each other and with the Pope, using hired thugs called bravi, trained to beat or kill. The Romans were known for their sharp satire, often directed at the Pope, using a statue in the Piazza Navona as a bulletin board for satirical writings. The temporal power of the popes. The popes believed their power was justified as heads of an international organization, arguing that it allowed them to govern impartially and maintain their spiritual independence. They based their claim on historical donations of land, such as those by Pepin and Charlemagne. The popes ruled the papal states as absolute monarchs, following the trend of the time, and argued that democracy was not suitable for either the state or the church in that era. The papal states encompassed a large area of central Italy, including Latium, Umbria, the Marches, and the Romagna, and the popes also claimed Sicily and Naples as papal regions. The popes faced challenges in maintaining control of these territories, with internal corruption, external threats from other Italian states. To maintain their power, the popes engaged in diplomacy, arranged marriages for their relatives, used armies, and, like secular rulers, sold offices and benefices to influential people. Nicholas V. Born into poverty, Tommaso Parenticelli became a humanist scholar and eventually Pope Nicholas V. Nicholas V had three main aims: to be a good pope, rebuild Rome, and restore classical art. He healed the papal schism by securing the resignation of the anti-pope Felix V and dissolving the Council of Basel. He believed that by leading the revival of learning, the church could regain its lost prestige. Nicholas V was passionate about classical scholarship, spending vast sums on collecting manuscripts, commissioning translations, and supporting humanists. He also commissioned a new translation of the Bible. Nicholas V was a builder as well. He repaired aqueducts, renovated churches, built new palaces, and planned to replace the old St. Peter's Basilica with a grander structure. He financed these projects with the proceeds of the 1450 Jubilee year, which attracted vast crowds of pilgrims. Nicholas V died in 1455, leaving behind a legacy of peace within the church, a revitalized Rome, and a foundation for the Roman Renaissance. Calixtus III. After Nicholas V's death, the cardinals elected Alfonso Borgia, a Spanish cardinal, as Pope Calixtus III. Calixtus III was primarily focused on launching a crusade against the Turks, neglecting the humanist scholarship that his predecessor had championed. He was criticized for his nepotism, appointing his nephews, including the future Pope Alexander VI, to important positions. He defended his actions, arguing that he needed loyal men around him in a hostile environment. Calixtus III died in 1458, leaving behind a legacy of unfulfilled ambition for a crusade and a Rome that was happy to see the end of its rule by barbarians. Pius II. Pius II was a complex figure, a gifted writer, a skilled diplomat, and a reformed libertine who had fathered several illegitimate children. He was a prolific author, writing poetry, fiction, history, and even a guide to horse care. Despite his humanist background, Pius II focused on reforming the church and organizing a crusade against the Turks, rather than patronizing the arts. His attempts at reform were largely unsuccessful due to resistance from within the church. Pius II's diplomatic efforts to unite Europe against the Turks were also frustrated by nationalistic interests and the reluctance of European powers to contribute to a crusade. He even appealed directly to Sultan Mehmed II to convert to Christianity, offering him the title of Emperor of the Greeks in the East in return. Despite setbacks, Pius II remained determined to lead a crusade, personally traveling to Ancona to await the arrival of the Venetian fleet. However, he died in 1464 before the crusade could launch, his ambitions ultimately thwarted by political realities and the disunity of Christendom. Paul II. Pietro Barbo, a Venetian cardinal, was elected Pope Paul II. Paul was known for his love of luxury and magnificence, and he maintained a lavish court. He rejected the pledges he had made previously to limit his own power. Paul clashed with the Roman humanists, dismissing many from their positions and imprisoning Platina, a prominent humanist scholar, for writing a threatening letter. Paul's actions damaged the papacy's relationship with the humanists and contributed to the growing perception of the church as a corrupt and repressive institution. Sixtus IV. Francesco della Rovere, a Franciscan friar and scholar, became Pope Sixtus IV. Despite his scholarly background, Sixtus IV quickly transformed into a politician and a warrior pope. He focused on strengthening the papal states and establishing papal authority in Italy using military force. Sixtus IV was notorious for his nepotism, appointing numerous nephews to powerful positions, who then exploited their offices for personal gain. His nephew Pietro Riario was known for his extravagance and ambition, while another nephew, Girolamo Riario, became infamous for his cruelty and ruthlessness as Lord of Imola. Sixtus IV's efforts to expand papal power led to conflicts with other Italian states, including Florence, Naples, and Venice. The violence and corruption that characterized Sixtus IV's pontificate further eroded the moral authority of the Church and paved the way for the excesses of his successor, Alexander VI. Despite his negative aspects, Sixtus IV also made contributions to Rome's urban development and artistic patronage. He commissioned the construction of the Sistine Chapel and expanded the Vatican Library, making it accessible to the public. Sixtus IV died in 1484. Innocent VIII. Giovanni Battista Cibo, a Genoese cardinal, became Pope Innocent VIII. He was known for his moderate intelligence and love of family. Innocent VIII openly acknowledged his illegitimate children and even arranged their marriages in the Vatican. He was less interested in humanism and scholarship than his predecessors, focusing instead on maintaining peace and stability within Italy. Innocent VIII formed an alliance with Lorenzo de' Medici, marrying his son Francesco Cibo to Lorenzo's daughter Maddalena. This alliance brought 5 years of peace to Italy, a welcome respite from the turmoil of previous decades. Innocent VIII's time was marked by a curious incident involving Jem, the brother of the Ottoman Sultan Bajazet II. Jem, defeated in a power struggle for the throne, had been captured by the Knights of St. John and was being held for ransom. Innocent VIII outbid other European rulers for custody of Jem, hoping to use him as leverage against the Ottomans. Jem lived comfortably in the Vatican as the Pope's guest, while Bajazet paid a hefty sum for his safekeeping. Innocent VIII, however, struggled with financial difficulties, resorting to selling offices and creating new ones to increase revenue. Everything in Rome seemed purchasable, from judicial pardons to the papacy itself. A man who committed incest with his 2 daughters, then murdered them, was let off by paying 800 ducats. When Cardinal Borgia was asked why justice was not done, he answered, God desires not the death of a sinner, but rather that he should pay and live. Corruption was rampant in the papal court. The Pope's son, Francesco Cibo, was an unprincipled scoundrel. He forced his way into private homes for evil purposes. Innocent VIII died in 1492. The stage was set for the tumultuous events of the late 15th and early 16th centuries, which would see the rise of the Borgia popes, the Protestant Reformation, and the sack of Rome. Chapter 16. The Borgias. The life and papacy of Rodrigo Borgia, who became Pope Alexander VI, Cardinal Borgia. Rodrigo Borgia was born in Játiva, Spain on January 1, 1431, to a family of minor nobility. After his uncle became Pope Calixtus III, Rodrigo moved to Italy, changed the spelling of his name to Borgia, and was made a cardinal at age 25. At 26, he was appointed vice-chancellor and head of the Curia, a position he held competently for 35 years. He earned a reputation as an effective administrator, lived simply, made many friends, and was popular with the Romans. Rodrigo was handsome, enjoyed the company of women, and fathered several children both before and after becoming a priest in 1468. Around 1466, he began a long relationship with Venanza de Catanai, who bore him 4 children. Rodrigo was a devoted father to these children and provided for them throughout his life. Alexander VI. After the death of Pope Innocent VIII, the cardinals elected Rodrigo Borgia as the new pope. He took the name Alexander VI. His election was celebrated in Rome with a magnificent coronation. Despite this, some expressed concern that Alexander VI would use his position to benefit his family rather than the church. He began his papacy by tackling the problem of rampant crime in Rome, instituting a crackdown that resulted in a period of relative order. Alexander VI commissioned numerous building projects in Rome, including a corridor between the Castel Sant'Angelo and the Vatican for the safety of future popes, and renovations to the Vatican itself, including what became known as the Appartamento Borgia. He also rebuilt the University of Rome, and was relatively tolerant of satire and criticism. Alexander VI appointed his sons to positions of power. He initially had high hopes for Giovanni, but after he proved himself incompetent, the Pope put his faith in Caesar, who possessed the necessary ruthlessness and political acumen. Alexander took his religious duties seriously, but his worldly conduct often contradicted Christian ethics. On one occasion, Alexander's son Caesar, to entertain his father, released into a courtyard several prisoners who had been sentenced to death, and from a safe point, showed his bowmanship by shooting fatal arrows into one after another of the convicts as they sought some refuge from his shafts. The sinner. Alexander VI ignored slander and ultimately embraced Machiavellian tactics in his pursuit of a strong papal state. This approach put him at odds with those who desired a more spiritual church, as well as those who benefited from a weak papacy. Despite his ruthlessness, Alexander VI occasionally reflected on his actions and admitted his sins, even vowing to reform himself and the church. The collapse of the Borgia power. Despite their successes, the fortunes of Alexander VI and his son Caesar took a sudden turn in 1503. Both were stricken with a severe fever after dining with Cardinal Adriano de Corneto. While rumors of poisoning spread through Rome, historians now believe they contracted malaria. Alexander VI died on August 18, 1503, and Rome erupted in celebration. Chapter 17. Julius II. The Warrior Pope. Julius II, one of history's most formidable popes, was a stern and impatient man, driven by a desire to free Italy from foreign armies and restore the papal states. Known for his fiery temper and military prowess, he personally led armies into battle, a sight unseen in Italy for centuries. He was more comfortable in military garb than in pontifical robes. Julius II's military campaigns and political maneuvering. Julius II's reign was marked by constant warfare and political maneuvering as he fought to secure the papal states and expel foreign powers from Italy. He engaged in a series of campaigns against various Italian cities and powers, including Venice. He formed strategic alliances, often with foreign powers like France, Germany, and Spain, but was always wary of their ambitions in Italy. He skillfully used excommunication and interdict as political weapons, forcing Venice to return seized cities and accept humiliating terms. His relentless pursuit of Ferrara, however, ultimately led to his downfall. Bramante's architectural legacy. Donato Bramante was the most celebrated architect of the era. His Tempietto, a small circular temple, became a model for Renaissance architects seeking to revive classical forms. He also designed the cloister of Santa Maria della Pace, the Cortile of San Damaso, and laid out the Via Giulia. Julius II entrusted him with several major projects, including the Belvedere, a summer palace, and the design of the new St. Peter's Basilica. The rise of Raphael. Raphael, born in Urbino and trained by Perugino, emerged as one of the most talented and beloved artists of the Renaissance. Raphael and Julius II, a fruitful partnership. In 1508, Raphael was summoned to Rome by Julius II to decorate the papal apartments known as the Stanza. He began with the Stanza della Segnatura, where he depicted the harmony of religion, philosophy, and classical culture, the life and art of Michelangelo. Michelangelo, born in Caprese and trained in Florence, was a towering figure in Renaissance art. Deeply influenced by Savonarola's puritanical teachings, his art often reflects a sense of moral struggle and the power of the human body. Michelangelo and Julius II, a tumultuous relationship. Michelangelo's relationship with Julius II was marked by artistic brilliance and personal clashes. The Pope commissioned Michelangelo to design a grand tomb, but the project was repeatedly delayed and scaled down due to papal finances and Bramante's interference. Frustrated by these setbacks and mistreatment, Michelangelo left Rome for Florence, the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Julius II eventually persuaded Michelangelo to return to Rome, where he commissioned him to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Initially hesitant, Michelangelo accepted the task and spent 4 years creating a monumental masterpiece. The frescoes depict scenes from Genesis, powerful figures of prophets and sibyls, and the ancestors of Christ, showcasing Michelangelo's mastery of anatomy, perspective, and composition. Chapter 18. Leo X, the Medici Pope. Giovanni de' Medici, the second son of Lorenzo the Magnificent, was destined for a career in the church from infancy. At the age of 16, in March of 1492, he became a cardinal due to his father's influence and political strategy. Giovanni was present in Florence when the Medici fell from power in 1494. He disguised himself as a friar but was denied entry to the San Marco monastery, led by Savonarola. He eventually escaped over the mountains. After 6 years as a fugitive in exile, he reconciled with Pope Alexander VI and returned to Rome. He was well liked in Rome for his generosity and good manners. He later served as a papal legate in Bologna and was captured by the French during the Battle of Ravenna. He eventually returned to Florence, helping to restore the Medici to power in 1512. In 1513, at the age of 37, Giovanni was elected pope, taking the name Leo X. His election was met with delight and optimism, especially after the tumultuous reigns of Alexander VI and Julius II. Leo's coronation was lavish, costing 100,000 ducats. Leo's reign, the enjoyment of the papacy. Leo began his reign with acts of forgiveness and promises of reform. However, efforts to implement more significant changes met with resistance. He was known for his good nature, generosity, love of the arts, and enjoyment of life. He maintained a large court filled with artists, musicians, scholars, and even jesters. Raphael's portrait of Leo X reveals a man of considerable weight, heavy features, and a hint of bitterness. Despite his worldliness, Leo was a devout Catholic who observed religious duties. Rome flourished under Leo X, experiencing significant growth and prosperity. Leo X, scholar and patron of learning. Leo established the University of Rome, combining existing institutions and supporting them generously. He promoted the study of Hebrew, Syriac, and Chaldaic, and continued his family's tradition of collecting books, rebuilding the Laurentian Library. The Vatican Library thrived under the leadership of notable librarians such as Tommaso Inghirami, Filippo Beraldo, and Girolamo Aleandro. Private libraries flourished in Rome, owned by cardinals, wealthy individuals, and scholars. Leo X generously patronized scholars and poets, awarding them with positions, financial support, and recognition. Michelangelo, the terribility of genius. Michelangelo's terribilità, a term used to describe his awe-inspiring personality and artistic power, stemmed from his immense energy, unwavering willpower, and singular devotion to art. He was known for his unconventional appearance, simple lifestyle, and dedication to his work, often neglecting personal comfort and social graces. Despite his wealth, he lived frugally and gave generously to his family. He preferred the company of simple people and valued solitude. He was notoriously difficult to work with, quick to anger and critical of others, even fellow artists like Perugino, Francia, and Raphael. He experienced frequent bouts of melancholy and struggled with a fear of damnation in his later years. Raphael, the golden boy of the Renaissance. Leo X had a strong preference for painting, particularly the work of Raphael. He showered Raphael with commissions, including completing the stanza, designing tapestries for the Sistine Chapel, decorating the Vatican Loggia, and contributing to the architectural plans for St. Peter's. Raphael, known for his agreeable nature and prodigious talent, embraced these tasks with enthusiasm, creating a vast body of work in a short time. A letter to his uncle reveals Raphael's financial success and artistic ambition. As for a wife, I must tell you that I am daily thankful that I did not take the one you destined for me, or indeed any other. In this instance I have been wiser than you, and I am sure that you must now see that I am better as I am. I have capital in Rome worth 3,000 ducats, and an assured income of 50 more. His Holiness allows me a salary of 300 ducats for superintending the rebuilding of St. Peter's, which will not fail me as long as I live. Besides this, they give me whatever I ask for my works. I have commenced the decoration of a large hall for His Holiness, for which I am to get 1,200 golden crowns. Thus you must see, my dear uncle, that I do honor to my family as well as to my country. Unlike Michelangelo, Raphael, he was sociable and enjoyed the company of others. While his manners were impeccable, his morals were more relaxed. He had numerous mistresses, which was generally accepted in the social climate of the time. Raphael's art largely avoided the darker and more profound themes explored by artists like Leonardo and Michelangelo, focusing instead on depicting the beauty and joy of life. Raphael's artistic output was phenomenal. He designed not only paintings but also mosaics, sculptures, decorative objects, and even architecture. Agostino Chigi, banker and patron of the arts. Agostino Chigi, a Sienese banker, was one of the wealthiest men in Europe, rivaling even kings and popes in his financial power. He was a major financial backer of both the papacy and various European rulers. His lavish lifestyle, including opulent palaces, extravagant banquets, and a vast art collection, became legendary in Rome. He was a generous patron of the arts, supporting artists like Raphael, Peruzzi, and Sodoma. He also financed the publication of classical texts, including Pindar and Theocritus. An anecdote describes his flamboyant gesture of throwing silver tableware into the Tiber after each course of a dinner party, only to have it discreetly retrieved later. Chigi married his longtime mistress in 1519 in a ceremony officiated by Pope Leo X. He died a few months later, leaving behind a vast fortune. Raphael's works for Agostino Chigi. Raphael's relationship with Chigi extended beyond mere patronage, as they were also friends. He painted several works for Chigi, including frescoes in the Villa Chigi. Raphael's last years and death. Raphael remained devoted to his mistress, even resisting Cardinal Bibbiani's suggestion of a marriage to the cardinal's niece. Agostino Chigi, recognizing that Raphael's frequent visits to his mistress were interfering with his work on the Psyche frescoes, arranged for the mistress to live in the Villa Chigi. Raphael died on Good Friday, April 6, 1520, at the age of 37. His tomb in the Pantheon bears a simple line, "He who is here is Raphael." A critical assessment of Raphael. Raphael was considered by his contemporaries to be the greatest painter of his age. While lacking the sublimity of Michelangelo, his work was unmatched in its overall beauty and harmonious composition. Michelangelo acknowledged Raphael's talent but considered it a product of profound study rather than innate genius. Raphael's art lacked the depth and psychological complexity of Leonardo and the emotional power of Michelangelo. Leo X, financial troubles and extravagance. Leo X's lavish spending on art, music, gifts, and military campaigns led to chronic financial problems. To generate revenue, he created and sold offices, essentially offering government bonds in a Renaissance context. He also borrowed heavily from Roman bankers at exorbitant interest rates. He even sold cardinalates, shocking many and contributing to the growing discontent that fueled the Reformation in Germany. He died on December 1, 1521, just before his 45th birthday, possibly from malaria. His legacy is multifaceted. He left behind a legacy of artistic masterpieces, a stronger papal state, and a church on the verge of a major schism. Under his rule, Rome experienced a golden age of art and culture, attracting the greatest talents of the time. Chapter 19. The Intellectual Revolt. The Occult in Renaissance Italy. The common man in Renaissance Italy, burdened by work and lacking leisure for education, inherited beliefs from his environment, readily accepting the marvels of theology alongside popular metaphysics unauthorized by the Church. Even humanists, more advanced in their thinking, sometimes displayed credulity towards superstitions. Boccaccio, known for his humanist writings, indulged in tales of headless horsemen and tritons snatching women. The Florentines, who liked to think that the air they breathed made them clever beyond compare. They held all important events on Saturday, and that it was a sure misfortune to march out to war by certain streets. Relic worship was prevalent in Italy, with churches claiming to possess a vast array of objects connected to Christ and the apostles. These relics included a swaddling cloth of the infant Jesus, hay from the Bethlehem stall, fragments of the multiplied loaves and fishes, the table from the Last Supper, and the picture of the Virgin painted by angels for St. Luke. Venetian churches boasted relics such as the body of St. Mark, an arm of St. George, an ear of St. Paul, roasted flesh of St. Lawrence, and stones used to kill St. Stephen. Magic and the supernatural. Nearly every object, every number and letter was believed to have some magic power. Some Romans fed to their lovers the rotting flesh of human corpses stolen from the cemeteries. Incantations were used to protect yourself from mad dogs. Satan often appeared to tempt or terrify or to seduce. Demons had a fund of mystic knowledge that could be tapped if one should properly please them. Some Carmelite monks at Bologna taught that there was no harm in seeking knowledge from devils, and professional sorcerers offered their expert charms in invoking the aid of demons for paying customers. Witchcraft and papal bulls. Witches, primarily women, were believed to possess demonic powers enabling them to perform supernatural feats, including foreseeing the future, flying, passing through walls, inducing love or hate, causing abortions and deaths. Pope Innocent VIII's bull Summus Desiderantes condemned witchcraft, acknowledging the perceived powers of witches and attributing some storms and plagues to them. The bull claimed that Christians were engaging in carnal union with devils, causing harm through spells and magic. While not officially establishing belief in witchcraft as church doctrine, the bull encouraged this belief and contributed to the persecution of witches. Examples of witch hunts: 41 women burned for witchcraft in Como in the year following the bull's enactment. 140 persons burned in Brescia and 300 more in Como for witchcraft. The number of accused witches rose, potentially fueled by persecution. Reports of 25,000 people attending a witches' Sabbath near Brescia. Brescia's signery protesting against the mass detention of suspected witches and interfering with executions. Pope Leo X issued the bull Honestus, ordering excommunication for officials who refused to execute sentences related to witchcraft. The signery of Brescia defied the papal bull, establishing oversight for witchcraft trials and investigating past condemnations. Despite Brescia's efforts, the witch hunts continued. Astrology and fortune-telling. Italian governments often employed official astrologers to determine auspicious times for important events. Julius II delayed leaving Bologna until his astrologer deemed the time favorable. Sixtus IV and Paul III consulted astrologers for scheduling important meetings. The belief in the influence of stars on human affairs was widespread, with university professors issuing astrological predictions. Aretino parodied these in his writings. The University of Pisa students demanded a course in astrology despite Lorenzo de' Medici's initial exclusion of it. Pico della Mirandola criticized astrology, while Marsilio Ficino defended it. Guicciardini remarked on the credibility given to astrologers despite their frequent inaccuracies. While rooted in superstition, astrology represented an attempt to understand the universe through natural law, moving away from a purely divine or demonic worldview. Chapter 20: The Moral Release. The intellectual and artistic flourishing of the Renaissance in Italy was accompanied by a moral decline. Political instability, marked by factionalism, warfare, and the rise of despots, disrupted social order and led to a sense of lawlessness. The skepticism of the educated classes towards Catholic Christianity led to a decline in the influence of the Church and the weakening of traditional moral codes. The clergy. While some members of the clergy led exemplary lives, widespread moral laxity existed among them, with accusations of fornication, homosexuality, avarice, and hypocrisy. On whatever side you turn, whether to the secular clergy of priests and bishops, or to the religious orders, or to prelates small or great, old or young, you see nothing but offenses, and all stink in my nostrils with the stench of mortal sin. Narrow, greedy, and avaricious, they have abandoned the care of souls, making a god of their belly, eating and drinking in disorderly feast, they fall thence forthwith into filth, living in lasciviousness. Feeding their children with the substance of the poor, they flee from choir service as from poison. Sexual morality. The Renaissance saw a loosening of sexual mores, particularly among the upper classes. Premarital sexual activity resulted in a high number of illegitimate children, with societal acceptance of such children. Rampant adultery was often condoned as a substitute for divorce, especially among those in diplomatic or arranged marriages. There was a prevalence of homosexuality, particularly among humanists and in cities like Naples and Venice. There was widespread prostitution, with a demand for both common prostitutes and a class of educated and refined courtesans known as courtigians. The concept of platonic love also arose, which idealized the refinement and spiritual charms of women and offered an alternative to adultery. Marriage. Marriage remained largely a matter of property and social alliances. Betrothals were arranged by families, with girls often betrothed at a young age. Large dowries were expected of brides, and a lack of dowry could hinder a woman's marriage prospects. Weddings were often extravagant affairs, adultery was commonplace, and while women were expected to be faithful, men often took mistresses. Desertion was also a common occurrence, leaving wives with limited options. Renaissance man. The Renaissance man embodied the intellectual and moral audacity of the era. He possessed a sharp and versatile mind, was eager for fame, and defied conventions in traditional morality. He embraced individualism and pursued personal success, often through ruthless means, replacing the moral sense with an aesthetic one, appreciating beauty in both art and crime. Renaissance woman. The status of women rose, particularly among the upper classes, with their increased involvement in education, politics, and social life. They received a thorough education, including Latin, history, literature, music, and sometimes art. Some excelled in intellectual pursuits, like Cassandra Fedeli and Vittoria Colonna. However, the average woman still faced societal constraints and domestic burdens, with examples like San Bernardino's views on wife-beating. And I say to you men, never beat your wives while they are great with child, for therein would lie great peril. I say not that you should never beat them, but choose your time. I know men who have more regard for a hen that lays a fresh egg daily than for their own wives. Sometimes the hen will break a pot or a cup, but the man will not beat her for fear of losing the egg that is her fruit. How stark mad, then, are many that cannot suffer a word from their own lady who bears such fair fruit. For if she speak a word more than he thinks fit, forthwith he seizes a staff and begins to chastise her. And the hen, which cackles all day without ceasing, you suffer patiently for her egg's sake. The home. The homes of the wealthy reflected the era's opulence, featuring elaborate architectural details, luxurious furnishings, and extensive art collections. Family size was generally small, particularly in cities, as economic prosperity encouraged family limitation. Family remained an important social and economic unit, with strong bonds between parents and children, and maternal figures playing a central role in household management, manners, and amusements. Italy led Europe in refinement of manners, hygiene, dress, and social customs. Bathing, fashion, and fine dining were important aspects of social life. The art of conversation, bel parlare, flourished, with salons and gatherings dedicated to intellectual discourse and witty exchange. Recreational activities included dancing, card playing, gambling, chess, tournaments, horse racing, hunting, and other sports. Public festivals, processions, and pageants were elaborate and colorful affairs, often involving music, dance, and theatrical performances. Perspective on Renaissance morality. The question of whether Renaissance Italy was truly more immoral than other times and places is complex. Comparisons can be drawn with ancient Greece and Rome, with similarities in intellectual freedom, sexual liberation, and political corruption. While immorality existed elsewhere, the Italian Renaissance may have been more open about it. Economic prosperity, political instability, and intellectual advancement likely contributed to the moral climate of the time. Attempts at reform were made through laws, papal pronouncements, and the sermons of preachers, but they ultimately failed to stem the tide of immorality. The moral decline of the Italian city-states left them vulnerable to foreign invasion. Chapter 21, The Political Collapse. The political and economic decline of Italy. By 1494, Italian city-states, though experiencing an artistic peak, were facing economic decline. Their local economies struggled to compete with the trade of Atlantic nations, particularly Spain and Portugal, who were capitalizing on new sea routes to India and China. Italy's political fragmentation left it vulnerable to the rising power of unified nations like France, Spain, England, and Germany. These nations fielded national armies composed of their own people, while Italian cities relied on small, unreliable mercenary forces. France's invasions and Italy's vulnerability. France, under Charles VIII, saw an opportunity to exploit Italy's weakness and stake its claim on Naples and Milan, based on historical claims and invitations from Italian factions themselves. Charles VIII's invasion in 1494 exposed the vulnerability of Italian defenses. His army easily swept through Italy, capturing Naples and highlighting the superiority of national armies over mercenaries. The French invasion marked a turning point in Italian warfare. It showcased the effectiveness of national armies, the rising importance of artillery, and the potential for widespread devastation in future conflicts. Subsequent decades saw continued conflicts and shifting alliances involving France, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, and various Italian states. Papal intrigue and the sack of Rome. The papacy actively participated in these power struggles, forming alliances and waging wars to protect and expand papal territories. Clement VII, initially seen as a wise and cultured leader, became entangled in the complex web of alliances and rivalries, ultimately siding with France against Charles V. Charles V, angered by Clement's perceived betrayal, orchestrated the infamous sack of Rome. His largely Protestant army, led by the Duke of Bourbon, stormed and brutally plundered the city, subjecting it to widespread violence, looting, and destruction. Charles V's triumph and Italy's subjugation. The sack of Rome, a devastating event that shocked Christendom, left Clement VII a prisoner and marked the culmination of Italy's descent into foreign domination. A disastrous pontificate and the end of an era. Clement VII's pontificate, marked by political miscalculations, the devastating sack of Rome, and the loss of England to the Protestant Reformation, stands as one of the most disastrous in papal history. By 1534, the year of Clement's death, the Renaissance in Italy was effectively over. The peninsula was under Spanish control, the church was facing another schism, and the vibrant intellectual and artistic climate of the preceding decades had given way to a period of political instability and religious conflict. Chapter 22, Sunset in Venice. Venice's golden age amidst Italian decline. While much of Italy experienced decline in the 16th century due to war and foreign domination, Venice remarkably flourished during this period. Several factors contributed to Venice's resilience. Venice, though deeply impacted by war, remained uninvaded, preserving its homes and businesses. The city regained control of its mainland territories and maintained its dominance in Adriatic trade, and its leading families possessed substantial wealth. Venice also retained its leadership in luxury goods, with Venetian lace gaining prominence during this time. Chapter 23: The Waning of the Renaissance. The decline of Italy. The Italian wars of the late 15th and early 16th centuries left Italy devastated and under Spanish control, with the exceptions of Venice and the Papal States. The Spanish hegemony brought peace, but came at the cost of high taxes and economic decline. The Counter-Reformation. The rise of Protestantism and the subsequent Counter-Reformation led to increased religious orthodoxy and censorship in Italy. Literature. Scholarship shifted from Italy to France, and Latin was replaced by Italian as the language of literature. Michelangelo. The last phase. At last, Michelangelo's incredible energy failed. Aged 73, he had begun to have kidney stones. 12 years later, he wrote to a nephew, "As regards my condition, I am ill with all the troubles that are found in old men. The stone prevents me from passing water. My loins and back are so stiff that I often cannot climb stairs." Yet till his last year he went out in all weathers. He took the approach of death with religious resignation and philosophical good humor. "I am so old," he said, "that death often pulls me by the cape and bids me go with him." In February 1564, he grew weaker day by day and spent most of the time sleeping in his old armchair. He made no will, but merely left his soul to God, his body to the earth, and his goods to his nearest relations. He died on February 18, 1564, aged 89.